Hey, good morning, everybody. It's Tuesday morning. Actually, it's still Sunday here, but Tuesday morning. I wanted to show my fifth graders today's problem. So today's problem is called raspberry cake, and it's going to have you kind of working with fractions in different ways, not just subtracting fractions. I don't think you subtract fractions at all, actually. So I, I don't think so. Maybe a little bit, but it's dealing with recipes again. So remember last week we talked about recipes. Today we're going to do the same thing, but today for raspberry cake, which sounds pretty amazing. So the raspberry cake problem starts with this kind of notion, or starts with this idea. Let me hide this. Starts with this recipe. It tells you about baking cakes, and it says something important here. It says that it serves 8 people, right? But then the first thing they ask you to do is it tells you that there's only 4 people eating the cake. So it says they're only going to make half the recipe. So what I want you to do is think about how do I take a recipe and cut everything in half? How do I break it down if I only wanted to make half of something? And something about fractions, when you're using fractions, mixed numbers, one of the times that there's two really clear times where you're always using those types of numbers and having to add them or subtract them or divide them. And the two that I kind of lean to all the time or think about all the time are recipes. That's a big one. And the other one is when you're measuring something, making something, when you're doing construction work, right? So I think Miss Erickson showed you kind of making those blocks last week. That idea, that takes, because you're always measuring in inches and parts of an inch, like quarter inch, half inch, 5/8 of an inch, and then you got to break it out. You got to break it down. So cutting fractions in half or breaking down fractions or adding them together happens a lot in recipes, happens a lot in construction or making something, measuring something. So a couple of good things to look at. So we've got a recipe problem. When we look at half, I'm going to go into whiteboard now and talk about this really quickly. I set this up, and what I wanted to talk about was what does half of something look like? And this is not a complicated concept, right? Like the idea that we said there's a half pound of strawberries and they're asking us to cut that in half. Well, if we want to think about a pound, like if I think about, I like to use diagrams like this. If this is 1 pound of raspberries and I have half of a pound, right? I have this many. We should definitely make them look like raspberries. Where's my good raspberry color? Raspberries are kind of like this color, right? So we're going to say like this is our half pound of raspberries, right? So this is what a recipe takes. If I say that we're going to use half that much, well, what we have to do is we have to add a new line. We have to come in here and we have to break this into half. So we have to cut this bit of raspberries into half, right? So I'm going to cut that all the way across. And now what I've done is the part that I want to actually use, I'm going to color a different color pink. I want to use just this. Well, you can hardly tell it's different. I want to use just this top part here. That's half of what I started with, right? So what we would say is this is 1/2 of half of all of half of a pound, right? And that would be how much is colored in? Well, it's 1/4, right? 1/4, or we could say which equals 1/4. And LB means pound, by the way. 1/4 pound of raspberries, right? So that's the way that part of the problem works. So I don't want you to get kind of confused on the beginning of the problem because, like it's just a pretty simple idea that you're taking this recipe and breaking it down. Then it starts to talk about, as we get to the second page of the problem, it starts to talk about issues of, I'm going down here, it starts to talk about this one, which is how many pieces each person eats and how much of a circle that would make, right? So I want you to kind of work through the problem. And part three talks about making a recipe for 20 people. And that means you're going to be scaling the recipe up. Instead of cutting it in half, you're going to be scaling it up. So how would you do that? So I don't think this problem will take you very long. I'm thinking if you read carefully, this is like maybe 20 minutes. Remember, I want the work done in your notebook, labeled. I'd like you to then submit it as part of this document at the top. Take a picture of your notebook, put it up here when you turn it in. You can also, if you want to, just attach a photo into the assignment. That would be fine as well, like as a separate file, which some people have asked me about. But raspberry cake, enjoy the problem, do well, read it carefully, and ask your teacher for help. And good luck this week. Have a good week, guys. Bye, everybody.